Well, here we are. Welcome back to All Saints Parish Church here in Bakewell. And it's spring and everybody's feeling renewed. John, before I got married, my prospective father-in-law, he took me to one side and I thought, uh-oh, here comes the talk. And sure enough, he says, "Now then, lad," good Sheffield printer, actually, master printer. "Now then, lad, there's only two things you need to know about marriage." He said, "Sex and money." He said, "But don't worry about the sex, because it wears off in your 50s. So he didn't actually give me any advice on money. And so I thought I'd ask you.
Well, before ever even venturing to dip a toe into that very dangerous ocean, I come back to the infallible, to the one who knows, because for sure I don't. So what does? Who or what does? Well, it's becoming a standard beginning to these videos now, isn't it? You can guess what I'm going to say next. Feet on the floor. Bottom on the chair, listen and look. And what happens? Well, if we really put it into practice, we'll almost invariably find a sense of space. And in that space, a sense of stillness, which really we could call presence. And strangely enough, with that sense of presence comes a reassurance. It's almost as though an invisible hand is holding me. Now, one of the old-fashioned words for God, you don't often hear it these days, is providence. That which provides. One of the first towns they founded and named in the early settlers in America, the Pilgrim Fathers, they called it Providence. It's in Massachusetts, isn't it? Providence. Well, they must have had that feeling. They'd come across the Atlantic, survived a winter. Money. At this particular moment, that providence somehow seems more relevant, doesn't it? That spiritual comfort, that feeling of sufficiency. Confronted by an ocean of problems, that one thing is certain, isn't it? Absolutely certain. Infallible. So when the good book says, trust in the Lord, it makes sense, doesn't it? Put not your trust in princes, neither in any child of man. Well, I suspect money is one of those children of men, isn't it?
Is it a naughty child?
Well, it can be sometimes. It can be like the little girl. When she was good, she was very, very good. When she was bad, she was horrid. Well, I've never made much money in my life, but rather amazingly, I seem to have been provided. I can tell you, as a farmer, you don't make much money out of growing organic carrots, even selling them in London.
There is a most lovely scene in the BBC 1975 documentary with you and Shirley are in the kitchen, at the kitchen table. and it's 1975, so I think it might even have been old shillings and pound shillings and pence. And you're what we call coppering up, you know. Well, I got 16 shillings for the leeks.
Yes.
And you totaled your annual income at something just over £1,000.
As pleased as punch with it, wasn't I? Thrilled. Yes. Oh dear. Yes. Our first £100 or £1,000, you never forget it. You value it more than all that may come later. I believe there's another verse in the Bible. It's not actually, it's often quoted as money is the root of all evil. I believe it's love of money is the root of all evil. I think that's correct. Well, love of, in other words, attachment to, identification with. As Jesus says, take no thought for the morrow, what ye shall eat, what ye shall drink, neither for the body wherewith it shall be clothed, but seek ye first the kingdom of God. And that, in my present understanding, is this presence of spirit, that which is here now. Seek first that, and then all else will be added unto you. Wow, what a thing to say. If one could really believe that and trust in it. Can it really be so? Well, I'll give you another little example of that. I sat here 5 minutes ago. I had no idea what you were going to ask me, still less what I might say. How on earth do I enter into answering a question on money? And yet, you see, having made that connection with this providence, which is not only material needs, but actually it provides what to say, doesn't it? It provides the answer. It's actually provision of all that we require, including the yearnings of our heart, the freedom, the love, the peace, the meaning, everything that we feel we lack. Make connection with this ever-present providence. And suddenly it happens so gently, we're hardly aware of it. It's just sort of, you know what it's like? It's like when the clouds pass and there's a shaft of sunlight. Suddenly you realize that the sun is there behind the cloud. Suddenly we're, as it were, lifted up and reassured that there's a higher authority. There is an all-wise, all-merciful providence that is active behind the scenes of this life, behind our human confusion and darkness. That we're not alone.
That's all very ethereal, John.
Is it too ethereal? That was what I thought.
There's a saying somewhere, his head in the clouds, no earthly use.
Well, yes, what earthly use am I? Well, good question. What earthly use am I?
But, some people, of course, they would say, come on, John, we all need money to survive, to get through life. And you've been on your uppers more than once, I guess. Certainly, I recall the time when you were on a road trip in the Mojave Desert and you had very little cash and you were very conscious of it. You had to hire a car, I think a Dodge it was, and set off into the Mojave Desert, into the wilderness. How did you survive then with very little money?
Well, I was driving along in a state of near despair. I came to a gas station, a little caff and gas station, and there was a sign there saying cook wanted. Well, I went in. There were a nice couple of elderly people there. And, well, I'd never been a cook, of course. I was a farmer. Anyway, I became a cook. And do you know, I've never earned so much money in my life. I couldn't believe it. $10 an hour or something. At the end of the day, I had, no, a bit less than that. I can't remember. Anyway, a pocket full of dollars. I mean, doing pancakes and things and taking things out of the fridge and putting them on the hot plate, and it wasn't very difficult. No, I didn't know how to. Americans do funny things with eggs, different to me. I had to learn how to flip them out of a frying pan against a wall that was all covered in grease, of course, where all the fat was spilled out of the frying pan. And eventually I learned how to do it. I was quite good at it. Because they like their eggs done like that.
Is that called eggs over easy?
I think that's right, yes.
Well, you're the chef.
They had a lot of funny terms for things. in my old-fashioned English way, I had to learn also another language. Oh dear.
So, were they impressed with your chef's CV?
They didn't ask about that. Anyway, I stayed there some months, and I earned enough money to hire another car. And
can you remember what it was called, this place, John?
yes, it was called Amboy. And when my time was up, the couple there, they had a holiday home, I think on, was it Lake Tahoe, where they dammed the Colorado River, and there was a car hire firm in Las Vegas. If you can imagine a place less like me than Las Vegas, I went there and got the hell out of it as quickly as I could. And I spent my first night sleeping under the stars in the desert outside Las Vegas. I looked up at those blessed stars and felt the cold night wind on my face. I thought, oh, freedom. I'm back where I belong.
And what was the name of the cafe?
Roy's Caff.
On, where was that?
Well, I'd never heard of, you know. Do you know, I knew nothing about the pop culture at all. I'd never heard. Phil's dead keen on all this pop stuff. He knows all the pop stars like I know the breeds of sheep and cows. We laugh our heads off at how different we are in our tastes and likes. And anyway, when I think Phil read the manuscript and he asked me, and I'd never heard of Route 66, and it wasn't actually on Route, well, it was a sort of, they built a new road there, and this was on a little sort of backwater road now. Maybe it was the old road, I don't know. I wasn't interested really. Anyway, that's where it was.
The legendary Route 66, sung about by every rock and roll star from the 1960s onwards, and also frequented by Bob Dylan, who actually made an original painting of it, which I've seen.
Yes, well, I probably cooked him breakfast, but he didn't know me, I didn't know him, so the occasion passed unnoticed. So money, yes, it's an extraordinary thing. Doors open. Then I went to Russia, and of course I'd never been a teacher before. I knew nothing about children, I never had any, and just because I spoke English, and the only Englishman in this little place where I was, and They were wanting to learn English, so I found myself teaching, and of course I had never earned much at that, but it was enough to pay my way.
But you didn't become a chef in Russia with your CV.
No.
Yes, that's probably the most misquoted verse in the Bible. Money is the root of all evil, but it's not. It's the love of money. As you say, it's the attachment. Would you say that money itself is neutral?
Well, if we come back into this oneness, you see, this ever-present presence, what happens to the goods and bads of life? In that oneness, when we look at life from that one point of view, one of the things that happens is we don't judge. You don't sort of, perhaps because you're at one yourself, there's no need to separate life. You see life more as a whole. It really does. So much depends on your point of view. There's a simple example. If you're standing at the bottom of a mountain, you can't see very far and there seem innumerable choices. You probably wonder whether to climb it or not. Life's full of choices. When you go up to the top of a mountain, and you just look down and see the world down there, it seems simpler, doesn't it? Of course, you may carry your luggage, your mental luggage with you, your problems with you. We tend to do this. But usually, in the process of going up the mountain, we let go at least some of the burden. There's usually a sense of relief. Good and bad, black and white. They say as you get older, you don't see the world so much in terms of black and white, but different shades of grey.
50 shades of grey, John.
50 shades of grey? Why not 51? Infinite number of shades of grey. Jesus also gives us the examples of the animals, the birds. They toil not, neither do they spin. Well, I think that's the flowers of the field, is it? Anyway, whatever, all nature, you see. Nature is provided for, isn't it, marvellously? Who feeds the birds? Who causes the grass to grow in spring?
Yes, doesn't he say, your Father knows what you need?
Yes, indeed. Looking back on life, I suppose it was never my priority, and I never gave much attention to it, really, but in a strange way, I do seem to have been provided in the most remarkable way, not only with money, but with everything else needed for life. You really wonder who's lived my life. I'm not sure that I have at all, really. Who's this speaking now? I hardly know.
In the evangelical church, we used to sing. Oh, don't worry, I won't sing it. But there was a chorus we used to play quite often, based on one of, I think, Paul's letters. God will supply all my needs for each day, according to his riches in Christ Jesus.
Well, indeed, who does know when we wake up in the morning what's going to happen during the day? Extraordinary, isn't it? We just don't know, do we? And look at this situation now, as the whole world's worried about this virus. Extraordinary thing. I had 2 letters today from somebody in Portugal, somebody else in Austria, who was just saying that no one knows what to think or feel or do. And really, it's the same here, just nobody knows. We just don't know what to do we? So we're just sort of waiting. I find it rather comforting in a way that the whole world is usually so sure of the rights and wrongs of life, it simply doesn't know, does it, what to do.
We were saying earlier, John, how this virus, very real threat, has emphasised how truly connected we are.
Yes, indeed. We're all in the pot together, aren't we?
And I suppose the revelation for me, speaking to my daughter in Mexico last night, was, as I said earlier, it's not so much about my personal well-being, it's about not wanting to be a carrier.
And none of us know if we are carriers, do we?
There is a sort of a shadowy feel to it. I can't help noticing that it really heightens one's senses. You're on full alert, you're on red alert, and somehow everything comes into clearer focus. It's not like you sink down, below the radar. Your head's up like a meerkat above the parapet.
Why don't you tell what you told me before we started this video about being in the co-op this morning?
I wanted to see what it was like. I wore white latex medical gloves, and just to see what it felt like. But it was to pay attention to how many touch points there are. The handle of the door, the pin when you put your pin number in the machine, picking the fruit, the bananas. And I thought, well, just like I have done, any number of people have turned the bananas over to see them. And you completely recalibrate your attention and to every little thing, particularly those things that you touch, and you see other people touching it. And it's like a meditation. Exactly. You're paying attention to simply what is in front of you.
Exactly. I thought that was a wonderful example when Phil told me, because it is precisely what's called the outer turn of meditation, when we're told to simply pay attention to what we are doing. And if you can just go through a day like that, you will find yourself in a state of, as you say, heightened awareness, which is exactly what most of our viewers on these videos are really seeking for. Enlightenment. It's as simple as that, my dears. The inward turn following a mantra, and the outward turn of just listening and looking and feeling and touching and being aware of it. That's the secret. And in that awareness, there is the watchman, the observer, takes a step back. You see it. And that's perfect meditation, you see. And you're happy because of it. You're really chuffed about that experience, aren't you? Yeah. Feeling as though something great has happened. And it really is great, because compared to our normal life, which is asleep, we think we're awake, but we're not. We're all sleepwalkers walking around lost in our heads, lost in a sort of semi-sleep, semi-thinky state in our heads. And then we really wake up like that, just through this simple exercise of giving attention the world is transformed.
I honestly haven't heard the practice of meditation, the inner turn and the outer turn, put in such graphic simplicity as a visit to the co-op. And it does, I feel awakened by, oh my gosh, what have I been missing?
Exactly. Where have I been? Yes, this is... This is, I think, why they say that the greatest saints recognize themselves to be the greatest sinners, because when you do get a moment of awakening like that, you see, where have I been this last 60 years? I've just been absent. I haven't been present. I've been asleep. And you begin to take on board the awful, truly awful consequences of sin, which is simply this absence of not being present.
We're blind to the providence.
And impose our blindness all on everything around us. We drag everything down with us. And talk about the blind leading the blind, that is the world.
We are all familiar with that saying, I think, that you do not see the world as it is, you see the world as you are. It's like a projection of how you perceive inwardly, you project that onto.
Exactly.
There are perhaps two perceptions of money, John. One might be embodied by the example of Midas, who was obsessed with gold, and everything that he touched turned to gold, which had its advantages but also its disadvantages. And then there's the example of Superman, who was allergic, certainly, to green kryptonite in the comic books. And if he touched or got near green kryptonite, he would lose his superpowers. So I must ask you, are you Midas or Superman?
Well, somewhere far away I had heard of Midas, but only just heard of him, but that's the super cryptoman. I've never heard of it until just now, so I hardly know what to say.
You haven't seen Superman Marvel Comics or any of the umpteen films made with Superman?
I don't think so.
It's difficult sometimes. You see, John, I'm trying to sort of straddle two very different cultures here. We've got something like 40% of our audience in America are under 35 who grew up with Superman. So I'm trying my best to be relevant here.
I'm sorry I can't be better at that. What I was interested in as a young man was farming.
Well, I suppose, in a nutshell, I could rephrase that question more, shall we say, neutrally by saying, does money attract or repel you?
Oh, neither, really. So long as I've got some, I don't really think much about it, really. Of course, I talk a lot about being present. Well, that doesn't mean to say that I am always present. I try to be, but of course I'm not. It's never really been uppermost in my mind. In a funny sort of way, I seem to have got through life. I can't say without it, because I've always had some, well, usually had some, but enough.
Going back to the co-op, I do remember an instant, only a few short years ago, where I had access to, in total, 72 pence. I had to go, down the side of the chair. And that's all I had for my evening meal. And I went to the co-op and I bought a tin of garden peas, some pasta and some tuna, I think. And I made like a risotto, a pasta, well, that would have been rice, wouldn't it? But it wasn't. It was pasta with peas and tuna. Oh, I thought I was a king. I was blessed. I loved it. And I didn't miss being completely out of cash. It's a bizarre sense of freedom.
I can endorse that from my own experience, because at the times when I have had least and have lived most frugally, for many years, my early years of my farming, I bought almost nothing. I just lived on what the farm produced. I had a big black pot. There's an open fire there, and I had a big black pot on the open fire. I'd boil beans. I'd boil several days' supply of beans. They got it sort of thicker and thicker soup. And I made my own bread, grew my own wheat, ground it. And many a meal I just had bread and this bean stew, and thought I lived like a king. Yes, there's nothing like a bit of shortage to make you appreciate what you've got, isn't it? Much more fun, really. It's heightened awareness again, doesn't it? Indeed.
I remember in one of your books, John, you allowed yourself, I think it was at the farm in Bicker, in your budget, you allowed yourself one book and maybe, I think, a magazine or something. This was your luxury.
I think it goes back a long, long time in my life, actually. Very many years to when I was quite a young man, I think. I just felt dissatisfied with not only the conversation of this world, but the sort of providing of this world, excess food, excess everything, the so-called entertainment, the interest of this world never really satisfied me. So I think sort of instinctively I just always drew back into silence, and very often into solitude, which for me has never been empty. It's never been an absence of the good things of life, but the fullness. I don't think I would have used the word spirit as a younger man, but somehow I just felt at home there, compared to the comparatively didn't feel at home in the world. I've just finished editing my next book, describing several months I spent in Africa, when I was lucky enough to spend much of the time in the desert. And I so fell in love, well, before I even got to the desert, with the great spaces of Africa. I was never interested in going to the cities or towns. I always went to the empty places on the map, took the smallest roads, and just, I did love that space, the silence, those great spaces. I felt immediately at home there, expanded into a greater reality, in which the frivolity of this world just sort of dropped away. That was the last thing I wanted. And then on the few occasions when, after spending weeks alone in the desert, I came back into some sort of so-called civilized situation, and talking just drove me nuts then. And after a couple of days talking, I just I remember I made these notes in my notes, how I longed to be back in the desert again. There's an expression is that you get fed up with it. Exactly what happened to me after a day or two of human contact and, too much eating and talking. I just got fed up with it. I just wanted to be back under the stars again. And this really has evolved into what I now call this ever-present presence, this stillness, where I feel a completion that I never do in the world of words and talking. And you're always sort of swapping bits of incompletion, aren't you? Questions and things where there's really no answer. When you find this depth, then you're beyond question. There aren't any questions there because it's so obvious. It's just beyond question, beyond doubt. And it offers a completement, a fulfillment which we just never find in the dancing among the shadows of this world, which is what it is really. And when you become as acquainted with it as I'm blessed to be now, it becomes ever clearer that I said dancing shadows is just what it is. The dancing shadows of this world are just insubstantial. That's a good way of describing it. See, this presence is substantial. It's like the air that fills balloons. If you think of our body, those of you that have been lucky enough to see someone die and spend some time contemplating a corpse soon after death, you'll more than likely have noticed that something goes out of the body. It really is like the air goes out of a balloon, and the body that's left behind, that goes into the earth and the grave, really is not the person, is it? So what happens to the person? Well, this is what's called the soul. I remember particularly clearly with my mother and my father that what's left is still the person, but invisible. You go from visibility and sort of embodiment into the freedom of spirit. So this is really the substance that fills the balloons of what we call the flesh. And at death, which is really liberation, the substance goes out, and just like a bit of shriveled up rubber. The balloon the body, the flesh, just disintegrates back into the earth. Yes, that's why these sort of questions about, well, one's reactions to the world, yes, they have their place, but somehow they rather melt away before the greater reality of this ever-presence. I spent a Christmas in a cave, totally alone, in the Namibian desert. I don't think I've ever been so happy in my life. And I remember thinking of Christmas, far, far away, 10,000 miles away, there were people celebrating Christmas, all the tinsel and a few dry biscuits and water. I was meditating there one day, early one morning it was, I think, and to my absolute joy, do you know what happened? A little fox, a little desert fox. Well, my eyes were closed and I heard a little patter of feet. I opened my eyes and there was this little fox sniffing at me. I didn't dare move and he sniffed around and pattered away. And then next evening, or the day after, he came again. I was thrilled. I couldn't think anything in the whole wide world could have filled me with such total joy. is that was such a wonderfully clear demonstration to me of the total provision, the total providence of nothing. That's it. Because that's the desert experience. You see, the world, particularly if, as happened to me, I was sort of prepared for it by weeks of ever greater space and solitude. In a sense, the world gets further and further away, and then it's in nothing that we find everything. This is really the great mystical experience. That the everything is nothing, the more and more of less and less. Here you are, this is the real answer to money, isn't it? And it's in the nothing that you discover everything. And of course that isn't bits of metal in your pocket that you may find have enough. I'm sure you will get enough. but the abundance of this real life, the spiritual fulfillment is so great that any sort of worldly lack is inconceivable. I nothing lack if I am his and he is mine forever.
Where your treasure is.
Where your heart is.
Is it where your treasure is? Where your heart is?
I'm not sure, I forget. Your treasure, where your treasure is, yes, something like that. Well, indeed, it is where one's heart is, isn't it? What you love becomes one's provision, isn't it? I think that's why I was lucky in farming, because I so loved farming that I didn't sort of think of any other reward, really. My reward was just in the love that I poured out into my earth and vegetables and animals. So I've always felt, in a way, well, not always, because I've also had my times of depression, of course, but I've always felt abundantly provided, and I won't use the word always, but often felt abundantly provided, even though I seem to have not much of what the world calls riches.
What's the subtitle of your new book, John?
Mystic Apprentice to Working for Love. Yeah, that's the thing, work for love, and then you will be provided, no doubt. And another great principle of meditation, you see, is not to look for results. Now, when most people start to meditate, there's a woman funny enough, it was she's in Germany now, who terribly wants to sort of have results very quickly. She only just started to meditate. I'm trying to sort of tell her tries not to think of results, but of course it goes in one ear and out of the other. She's so full, she wants to be enlightened next week. Well, doesn't want to sort of settle down to the daily plod. But yes, because all results is really a projection forward of our own ego, isn't it? And then we sort of map out our future. Do this, do that, and it's all sort of that. Then sometimes it works out, often it doesn't, and we get upset. But a much better way is to have absolutely no interest in results or the future. Do something for the love of it, and then miraculously things happen. I mean, all this video business, it was the last thing that ever occurred to me at any time in my life that one day I'd have an audience of millions listening to these things. Whatever for, it would have seemed absolutely... I think I sort of shrunk away from it, and yet now, in extreme old age, this is descended upon me. Extraordinary, isn't it?